I spent 8 years scrubbing floors in a mansion that wasn't mine. 8 years of waking up before the sun, of folding another woman's laundry, of being invisible in rooms full of people who never once asked my name. One afternoon, a woman in white heels shoved me into the pool in front of 50 guests, laughing like it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. Nobody moved to help me. Nobody said a word, but the man who owned that mansion saw everything. And what he did next, in front of every single person there, made her wish she had never touched me. If you're new here, stay till the end, because this is one of those stories you don't forget. Hit that follow button right now because trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. My name is Odessa, and before I tell you what happened at that pool, I need you to understand who I was before that day because it matters. It changes everything about how this story ends. I grew up in a small house with thin walls and a mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. My mother was a nurse, the kind of woman who gave everything she had to strangers in hospital beds, who came home smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion but still found the energy to braid my hair and tell me stories before bed. She used to say something to me that I carried with me my whole life. She said, "Baby, kindness is never wasted. Even when nobody's watching, it's never wasted." I didn't understand what she meant back then. I understand it now more than I ever thought I would. When my mother passed, I was left responsible for my younger sister, Renee. She was still in school, still had dreams of becoming something bigger than the neighborhood we grew up in, and I made a promise to myself that I would do whatever it took to make sure she got there. That promise is what led me to the mansion. That promise is what made me take a job as a maid for a man named Weston Cole, one of the wealthiest men in the country, a man whose name showed up in magazines and business headlines. A man I had never once seen smile in any photograph I'd come across. The mansion itself felt like its own world, marble floors that echoed every footstep, chandeliers that probably cost more than my mother made in her entire nursing career. Staff who moved through the halls like ghosts, careful not to be seen, careful not to be heard, careful not to exist too loudly in a place that wasn't built for people like us to be noticed. I learned quickly that the rule of that house was simple. Do your work, do it well, stay quiet, stay invisible. I didn't mind the invisibility, not really. I found comfort in the rhythm of the work, in the quiet mornings before the house woke up, in the small kindnesses I could offer without anyone requiring it of me. I left extra blankets for the older housekeeper whose bones ached in the cold months. I covered shifts for the younger staff members who had children waiting for them at home. I never expected anything in return. My mother's voice was always in the back of my mind, reminding me that kindness is never wasted, even when nobody's watching. There was one person in that house who did notice, though I didn't realize it until much later. His name was Harold, the head of household staff, an older man who had worked for the Cole family longer than I had been alive. Harold had a way of watching people, really watching them, the way you'd watch a fire to understand how it burns. He became the closest thing I had to a friend inside those walls. He never said much, but when he did speak, it always mattered. "You've got a good heart, Odessa," he told me once as we polished silverware in a kitchen bigger than my mother's entire house. In a place like this, that's rare, don't let it go extinct. I didn't know what he meant then either. Looking back now, I think he already suspected something the rest of us didn't know yet. Weston Cole was not the kind of man you got to know easily. He was distant in the way powerful men often are, buried under the weight of businesses and deals and responsibilities that seemed to age him faster than his actual years should have allowed. I rarely saw him during the day. He worked long hours, locked away in his office, and when he did move through the house, he moved quickly, quietly, like a man who had learned that stillness invited questions he didn't want to answer. He was polite to the staff, always polite, but there was a wall around him that none of us ever tried to climb. That changed, or at least it seemed to change when Bianca entered his life. She came in like a storm dressed in silk. Beautiful, sharp-tongued, the kind of woman who knew exactly how a room would react to her before she even walked into it. The engagement happened fast, faster than any of us expected, and the mansion transformed almost overnight. New decorations, new rules. New tension that crawled through the hallways like something we could all feel but none of us could name. Bianca had a way of looking at the staff that made my skin crawl, though I couldn't explain it to anyone who hadn't experienced it themselves. It wasn't overt cruelty at first. It was small things, a snapped finger instead of a spoken request, a cold stare that lingered a second too long, comments disguised as jokes that weren't jokes at all. "You people are lucky to even be in a house like this," she said once, to no one in particular, though her eyes lingered on me the longest. I let it slide. We all let it slide. That was the unspoken rule of survival in that house. You absorbed what you had to absorb, and you kept moving because the alternative was losing a job that fed families, that paid for school tuitions, that kept lights on in houses just like the one I grew up in. But there was something about the way Bianca looked at me specifically that felt different from how she looked at everyone else. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought maybe I was imagining it, projecting insecurities that weren't really there. It wasn't until the night of the engagement celebration that I understood exactly what that look meant. The engagement party was unlike anything that House had ever seen. Guests arrived in cars worth more than most people's homes. String lights wrapped around the garden like something out of a dream. Champagne flowed freely, laughter echoed off the marble walls, and for one evening the entire estate glowed like it belonged in a fairy tale. I was working near the pool area that evening, refilling drinks, clearing empty glasses, moving carefully through a crowd of people who barely registered my existence. I remember the exact moment everything shifted. Bianca was holding court near the edge of the pool, surrounded by a group of women laughing at something she'd said, her diamond ring catching the light every time she gestured with her hands. I was reaching for an empty glass on a nearby table when she turned toward me. I don't know if it was the champagne, or the attention, or some deeper insecurity I still don't fully understand, but something in her eyes had shifted into something colder, something meaner. You know, she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, I've been meaning to ask, do you people ever get tired of serving instead of living? The group around her laughed. I felt my face grow hot, but I kept my eyes down, kept my hands steady, kept moving the way I always had because that was the rule. Absorb it, keep moving, but she wasn't finished. Actually, she continued, stepping closer, her heels clicking against the stone tile, let's see how well you swim, since apparently that's the only exercise your kind gets. Before I could process what she'd said, before I could even step back, her hand connected with my shoulder, and I felt the world tilt sideways as I fell backward into the pool. The water swallowed me whole. For a moment, everything went silent, muffled, distant, the way the world sounds underwater when you're not ready for it. When I broke the surface, gasping, disoriented, the first thing I heard was laughter. Not gasps of concern, not questions asking if I was okay. Laughter rolling across the garden like it was the punchline of the best joke anyone had told all night. I looked around at 50 faces, and not a single one of them moved toward me. Not a single one of them reached out a hand. They stood there in their designer clothes, drinks in hand, laughing at a woman treading water in a dress that clung to her skin, humiliated in front of an entire crowd that had decided her dignity wasn't worth the inconvenience of caring. I don't think I've ever felt smaller than I did in that moment. Not because of the water soaking through my uniform, not because of the cold air hitting my skin, but because of the silence that followed the laughter. The silence of 50 people deciding, without a single word, that what had just happened to me didn't matter enough to interrupt their evening. I swam to the edge, my hands trembling as I reached for the concrete, and that's when everything changed. I heard his voice before I saw him. It cut through the laughter like a blade through fabric, sharp enough that the entire garden fell silent almost instantly. What did you just do? Weston Cole was standing at the edge of the pool, and I had never, in 8 years of working in that house, seen his face look the way it looked in that moment. It wasn't anger in the way you'd expect from a man who just watched a party get disrupted. It was something deeper, something that looked almost like grief mixed with fury, like watching someone break something he had spent years trying to protect. He didn't wait for anyone to answer him. He walked straight past Bianca, past the stunned guests, and knelt at the edge of the pool, extending his hand down to me. Take my hand, he said, quietly, only for me to hear. I hesitated for half a second, unsure if this was real, unsure if I had somehow imagined the entire moment out of shock. But his hand stayed extended, steady, waiting, and I took it. He pulled me up out of that water like I weighed nothing at all, like the 8 years of invisibility had disappeared the moment his fingers wrapped around mine. The garden was completely silent now. 50 guests who had been laughing seconds earlier stood frozen, watching their host, the man whose party this was, kneel beside a soaking wet maid like she was the only person in the room that mattered. Weston stood, still holding my hand steady as I found my footing, and then he turned to face Bianca. The look on her face had shifted from amused superiority to something closer to confusion, maybe even the beginning of fear. Weston, it was just a joke, she said, laughing nervously, trying to salvage the moment. She's fine, look at her, she's fine. Do you have any idea who you just did that to? He asked, and his voice carried across that garden like thunder rolling over water. Bianca blinked, clearly thrown by the question. She's the maid, she said, like that answer explained everything, like that title stripped away any reason for concern. Her name, Weston said slowly, is Odessa, and her mother's name was Corrine. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I hadn't heard my mother's name spoken out loud by anyone outside my own family in years, and hearing it now, in this garden surrounded by strangers, hit me somewhere deep and unexpected. 20 years ago, Weston continued, his voice steady but heavy with something that sounded like old, buried emotion, My mother was in a car accident. The doctors told my father there was nothing more they could do. But there was a nurse on that floor who refused to give up on her. A nurse who stayed for hours past her shift, who fought for my mother's life like she was fighting for her own family. That nurse was Odessa's mother. The garden remained frozen, every guest hanging on his words, the sound of the pool water settling behind us the only noise left in the silence. My mother survived because of her, Weston said, and before she passed years later she made me promise something. She told me if anyone from that woman's family ever came into my life, I was to take care of them, protect them, honor the debt our family owed her. I never told anyone that Odessa was that woman's daughter, not because I was ashamed. Because I wanted her to earn her place here on her own merit, not out of pity, not out of obligation. And she has. Every single day for 8 years, she has proven exactly the kind of heart her mother had. I stood there soaking wet, my hair plastered to my face, tears mixing with pool water I couldn't distinguish anymore, listening to a truth I had never known, a connection I never realized existed, a debt that had quietly followed me into that house without my ever knowing it. Weston turned back to Bianca, and whatever warmth had existed in his voice moments earlier disappeared entirely. You just humiliated the daughter of the woman who saved my mother's life, in my house, in front of everyone I know, and you called it a joke. Bianca's mouth opened, but no words came out. I have watched you look down on people in this house for months, Weston continued. I told myself it was nerves, that marriage would soften something in you. I was wrong. Tonight, you showed me exactly who you are, and I will not build a life with someone who believes cruelty is entertainment. He reached into his pocket, removed the engagement ring box that had been sitting there since the toast earlier that evening, and set it down on the table beside her. This engagement is over, he said. Please have your things collected by morning. The garden remained utterly silent as Bianca stood there, humiliation washing over her face the same way water had washed over mine minutes earlier, except no one was laughing now. No one moved to comfort her. No one offered a hand. Weston turned back to me, his expression softening into something gentler, something almost apologetic, though none of what happened had been his fault. Let's get you somewhere warm, he said quietly, and for the first time in 8 years I didn't feel invisible in that house. I felt seen completely, entirely, in a way I hadn't expected to feel ever again. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Weston made sure I never went back to scrubbing floors again, not because he pitied me, but because he said my mother's sacrifice deserved to be honored properly. And because in his words, he had watched me carry myself with more grace in 8 years than most people carry in a lifetime. He offered me a position overseeing the household staff, working alongside Harold, ensuring that no one in that house would ever again be treated the way I had been treated that night. Bianca disappeared from that world entirely. The story of what happened at that party spread quickly through the same social circles she had once ruled, and doors that once opened for her began closing just as fast. Cruelty, it turns out, has a way of finding its own reflection eventually, even when it takes its time getting there. Renee finished school. She's studying now, building the future our mother always wanted for her, and every time I watch her walk toward that future, I think about how close I came to believing that 8 years of invisibility was simply what my life was supposed to be. I think about my mother often, about the promise she made me repeat to her before she passed, about kindness never being wasted even when nobody's watching. I think about how she never knew, how she couldn't have known, that a stranger's life she saved in a hospital room decades ago would someday reach forward through time and catch her own daughter when she needed it most. Kindness is never invisible, even when it feels like it. And cruelty, no matter how confident it looks in the moment, always eventually meets its mirror. If this story moved you the way it moved me telling it, drop a comment below and let me know. Odessa deserved better, because she did, and so does anyone who has ever been made to feel small for simply doing honest work. Like this video, subscribe for more stories like this one, and if you know someone who needs a reminder today that their kindness is never wasted, send this to them right now. You never know whose life you might be reaching, the same way one woman's kindness reached forward 20 years to change mine.